All right, so today we're diving into populism.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, and uh, specifically how some of these leaders, these populist leaders, I mean, how they work, how they get things
But
done.
how they try to get things done.
Right, because there's this really interesting thing you found in your research I want to get into
Oh, yeah.
about a populist candidate who seems to be doing everything right, at least on the surface,
Uh-huh.
but is absolutely tanking in the polls.
Yeah, I mean, it really throws a wrench into what we think we know about populism.
Right. Because usually you think of populism, you think of this like groundswell of emotion, this energy that just sweeps people into office.
That's the image, yeah.
So like what gives? Is this candidate missing something? What's the secret sauce they don't have?
Well, they seem to be hitting all the usual populist notes at first glance.
Okay, so they're playing the hits.
Right, like tapping into discontent, talking about how bad things are, and painting a really bleak picture of the future.
You mean the classic, if you don't elect me, everything's going to go to hell?
Pretty much, yeah.
But then there's this quote, and you highlighted this in your research, where the candidate says something like, it's always someone else's fault.
Oh, yeah.
Which at first I was like, okay, classic blame game.
Standard populist stuff.
But the more I think about that quote, the more I realize how insidious it is.
It's brilliant, isn't it? In a messed up kind of way.
Totally. Why does that kind of blame work so well on us? Like psychologically?
Well, I think it has to do with wanting simple answers.
Okay.
You know, life is complicated, problems are messy,
Mm-hmm.
and when someone comes along and says, hey, it's not your fault, it's their fault, well,
It's so much easier to swallow than it's complicated.
exactly. And then you don't have to take any responsibility for your own situation either.
So back to this candidate who's failing. If they're playing the blame game, what's going wrong? Why isn't it working?
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting.
Lay it on me.
Your research had this other populist who was doing really well. And this person, instead of blaming everyone else, they were all about everything's going to be great, society's going to be amazing, just elect Emmy.
Okay, so it's still super simplistic,
Oh, absolutely.
but it's framed positively.
Exactly. It's hope and optimism instead of just doom and gloom.
You know what? That never even crossed my mind.
It's like there's an art to populism.
Right. You got to know which emotions to play up, but also like how far to push it.
And this is where understanding the psychology of it all becomes so important.
Okay, I'm with you.
Because the successful populist, they also used a lot of really simple, repeated messages.
Yeah, I saw that in the research, and honestly, I thought it was kind of lazy campaigning.
Haha. I get it, it seems that way, but there's a reason it works.
Oh.
Ever heard of the mere exposure effect?
Oh, vaguely.
Basically, the more we hear something, even if it's not that profound, the more familiar and even likable it becomes.
So even if the message is kind of dumb, if you hear it enough, it starts to sound better.
In a way, yeah. And when you combine that with a message of hope and optimism, well, you've got a pretty potent mix.
Okay, so we're starting to see why one candidate is winning and the other's losing.
Yeah?
But what does this tell us about populism in general? Is it just about finding the right emotional button to push?
Ooh, that's the million-dollar question.
It really is.
And I think that's why understanding all these dynamics is so important. Like, what if we could develop a kind of populist radar?
Populist radar.
Yeah,
I like that. Like a sixth sense to spot when someone's trying to pull a fast one on us.
exactly. Because when we're aware of how these tactics work, then we can start being more critical about the messages we're receiving.
Like, okay, is this person actually appealing to my reason or just trying to play me?
Right on.
This is getting really interesting. I can't wait to unpack this whole populist radar idea even more after the break.
And building that populist radar, it's more than just spotting the emotional tricks, you know?
Oh, so there's more to it. Like what?
Well, remember all those things you found in your research? The stuff about people being unhappy with immigration, worried about the economy,
Oh, yeah, that was a big theme.
and feeling like other people are getting ahead while they're stuck.
Yeah, totally. I could see why that would make people listen to populist messages.
Right. Because populists, they're really good at taking those anxieties, those worries, and pointing them at someone specific.
Like it's all their fault.
Exactly. They make it us versus them, which is super powerful.
So they're giving people someone to blame for their problems.
Basically, yeah. A scapegoat.
Makes sense. So, okay, if we're building this populist radar of ours, what should we be looking out for? Like, what are the warning signs?
Good question. I'd say one of the biggest ones is when things get oversimplified.
Oversimplified.
Yeah, like taking really complicated problems and making them black and white.
Oh, like build a wall to solve immigration.
Exactly. Or ban all Muslims to stop terrorism.
Right. Those are way too simple for such complex problems.
And they often use like really catchy slogans to make it stick.
And emotional language, too.
Oh, yeah. It's all about getting you to feel something, not think too hard.
So it's appealing to our gut reaction, not our brain.
You got it. Another thing to watch out for is constant fear-mongering.
Oh, making it seem like the world's ending unless we do something drastic.
Exactly. Populists love to create that sense of crisis,
Yeah, like we need a strong leader to save us.
Mm-hmm. This is making me realize something.
What's that?
This populist radar, it's not just for politics, is it?
What do you mean?
I mean, think about all the messages we get bombarded with every day.
Like ads.
Exactly. Like how many ads play on our insecurities to sell us stuff?
Oh, all the time. Like those beauty products that promise to make you look younger.
See? They're using our fear of getting older to sell us something?
So this radar, we need it turned on all the time, not just during elections.
I think so. Once you start seeing these patterns, you realize they're everywhere.
And it makes you realize how easy it is to get manipulated.
It really does. It's kind of scary, honestly.
This is making me rethink how I look at everything now. Like, I gotta constantly be asking, okay, what's the real agenda here?
And who benefits if I believe this?
Exactly.
It's like being a detective.
It is a BS detector.
Which is super important these days, especially with all the fake news and stuff online.
It feels like we're drowning in information sometimes, and it's hard to know what's true.
Totally. That's why it's so crucial to think critically, to be able to tell what's real and what's not.
Okay, so how do we get better at that? How do we sharpen our populist radar and not get fooled?
Well, first, you got to know yourself.
What do you mean?
I mean, we all have biases, things we already believe.
Right, like if you already agree with someone, you're not going to question them as much.
Exactly. So try to get different viewpoints, even ones you don't like.
So I should read stuff I disagree with.
It can help you see things in a new way, challenge your own ideas.
Makes sense. What else can we do?
Pay attention to where information comes from. Who's saying it? Do they have an agenda? Are they trustworthy?
Like, consider the source.
Right. And don't just take things at face value. Dig a little deeper. Look for proof.
Don't just believe what you read on the internet.
Exactly. The more you investigate, the better you'll get at spotting lies and manipulation.
So it's about being active, not passive.
Totally. The more you think about the information you're getting, the harder it is for someone to trick you.
Okay, this is all about the negative side of populism. But earlier you said it's not always bad.
Oh, right.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. At its core, populism is about regular people feeling like no one's listening to them.
Okay.
And they want their voices heard.
So it could be a good thing.
Absolutely. Think about movements in history that used populist ideas to make things better, like the labor movement, the fight for civil rights.
Those are about regular people wanting change.
Exactly. They felt like the system wasn't working for them.
So it's not populism itself that's the problem. It's HW it's used.
You got it. When it's about bringing people together, having empathy, understanding each other, it can be really powerful for good.
But when it's about dividing people, making them scared and angry, that's when it gets dangerous.
Exactly. Which brings us back to that question. How do we tell the difference between good populism and bad populism?
Yeah, how do we do that?
It's tough, but there are some clues. Does the leader want to include everyone or just some people? Do they have real solutions or just vague promises? Are they appealing to our best qualities or our worst ones?
Those are good questions to ask.
It's like you need a moral compass for navigating the world of populism.
And that compass is our own critical thinking skills.
You got it. The better we get at thinking for ourselves, the easier it is to tell who's trying to help us and who's trying to use us.
This has been really eye-opening. I feel like I have a whole new understanding of how populism works.
Me too. It's been fascinating to unpack all this.
Man, it's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by all this, right?
Yeah, I get it.
Like populism, manipulation, all this information coming at us all the time.
Information overload.
But honestly, after this deep dive, I actually feel more empowered than overwhelmed.
Knowledge is power, right?
Exactly. Like now we have the tools to break down these messages, see what's really going on.
You're like a code breaker.
Haha, kinda. And it's not just about protecting ourselves.
Oh, right.
It's about thinking about the people who might be more vulnerable to this stuff.
Oh, yeah, like people who are struggling financially Or feeling isolated.
Totally. Or maybe they don't have access to good information.
They're prime targets for this kind of rhetoric, for sure.
So it's on us, the people who are more aware of this stuff, to help them out, right?
Absolutely. We got to help build that populist radar for everyone.
And that starts with talking about it.
Having those conversations.
Yeah, instead of just getting mad when we see someone falling for this stuff.
Writing them off.
Right.
Hmm.
We got to engage with them, but like in a respectful way.
Ask questions, share different perspectives.
Help them think critically about what they're seeing and hearing.
We're all in this together, right?
We got to have each other's backs, especially in this crazy information world we live in.
And even though we've been talking a lot about the bad side of populism, we can't forget that it can be good too.
Oh, right. Like those movements we talked about, the labor movement, civil rights.
People using populist ideas to fight for good things.
To make real change.
Exactly. So it's not about rejecting populism altogether.
It's about knowing it can be used for good or on bad.
Being able to tell the difference.
Between the people who actually want to help and the people who just want to use us.
And at the end of the day, it comes down to each of us, right?
Like taking responsibility for what we believe and what we do.
We can't just follow anyone who sounds good or promises easy solutions.
We got to think for ourselves, ask tough questions.
Demand better from our leaders.
Man, this deep dive has been amazing.
It really had.
I feel like I have a whole new understanding of this stuff.
Me too. It's been a wild ride.
So for our listeners out there, let's do a quick recap of what we've learned about populism.
Okay, hit me.
Populists often tap into feelings of discontent, that feeling that things aren't fair.
Right, and then they offer simple solutions to problems that are actually really complex.
And they love to create that us versus them thing, making people feel like they're part of a special group.
And someone else is to blame for all their problems.
And they use emotional language, catchy slogans, stuff that's easy to remember, but maybe not so deep.
All about bypassing that critical thinking.
But, as we learned, populism isn't always a bad thing.
Right. It can be used for good, too.
So it's all about having that populist radar.
Knowing how to spot those tactics, even when they're disguised as something else.
And thinking critically about everything we see and hear.
We all got to be informed, engaged citizens.
Think for ourselves, demand better from our leaders.
Exactly.
Well, that's our deep dive into the world of populism.
Hope you all enjoyed it.
We sure did. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and keep questioning everything.